Imagine this. You're out on an ordinary day, running errands, when something catches your eye. A man on the sidewalk is doing something unusual, so unusual, in fact, that a passing police officer can't help but stop and ask questions. What happens next is a mix of curiosity, confusion, and a little humor. In this story, we dive into a moment that could have gone 100 different ways, but instead, it took a twist no one saw coming. Who is this man, and what was he doing to draw so much attention? And most importantly, how does he explain himself to the cop who just won't let it slide? Stick around to see how one small action can turn into a big story, one that might just leave you thinking twice about what you'd do in his shoes. Let's get into it. The officer steps out of his car, curiosity written all over his face. The man, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, seems completely unaware of the attention he's drawn. He's crouched near the edge of the sidewalk, focused on something in his hands. People walking by glance over but don't stop, probably assuming it's nothing. But to the cop, it's strange enough to warrant a closer look. "Hey buddy, what's going on here?" The officer asks, his tone calm but firm. The man finally looks up, startled, as if he's been pulled out of a deep thought. "Oh, nothing, officer. Well, it's kind of hard to explain," he says, scratching his head awkwardly. The officer raises an eyebrow. "Hard to explain, huh? Mind showing me what you've got there?" The man hesitates, glancing down nervously, like he's deciding how much to reveal. The man slowly uncurls his fingers, revealing a small object in his palm. The officer leans in, his curiosity growing, but his expression stays unreadable. "Is that?" The officer begins, but the man cuts him off nervously. "It's just something I found. I didn't think it was a big deal, but now I'm not so sure." The officer studies the object carefully, his eyes narrowing. It's small, shiny, and slightly worn, clearly something that's been around for a while. "Where did you get this?" The officer asks, his tone a mix of suspicion and intrigue. "I found it over there," the man says, pointing toward a nearby bench. "It was just lying on the ground." His voice is defensive now, like he knows this situation could turn serious, but isn't sure how to avoid it. The officer takes a step back, nodding slowly. "All right, let's figure this out." The officer reaches for his radio, pausing for a moment before speaking into it. The man's heart races as he watches, unsure of what's about to happen. "Dispatch, I've got a situation here. I'm going to need some information on." He glances at the object in the man's hand before finishing the sentence in a quieter tone, as though he doesn't want to alarm anyone nearby. The man shifts uneasily, his mind running in circles. What had seemed like a harmless discovery now feels like it could be a major mistake. "Look, officer, I didn't mean any trouble," he says, his voice cracking slightly. "I just thought it was interesting. I didn't even know it was important." The officer lowers the radio and fixes his eyes on the man, his expression unreadable. "It might be nothing," he says slowly, "but it might also be something we can't ignore." The man feels a pit in his stomach as he watches the officer examine the area, searching for more clues. Nearby, a small crowd begins to form, whispering among themselves as they try to piece together what's going on. The man glances nervously at the onlookers, feeling the weight of their eyes. "Am I in trouble?" he asks quietly, but the officer doesn't answer. Instead, he picks up the object carefully and motions for the man to follow. "Let's find out." The man hesitates before following the officer, his mind racing with every worst-case scenario. As they walk toward the patrol car, the crowd behind them grows more curious, their whispers turning into murmurs. Suddenly, a voice from the back of the group calls out, "Wait, I think I know what that is." Both the man and the officer turn around, surprised. A middle-aged woman pushes through the crowd, her expression a mix of concern and urgency. She points to the object in the officer's hand and says, "That looks just like something my grandfather used to have. It could be really old or really valuable." The officer frowns, now holding the object as if it might break. "Valuable, you say? How valuable are we talking here?" he asks. The woman shakes her head. "I'm not sure, but if it's what I think it is, you might have stumbled onto something much bigger than you realize." The man's stomach sinks further. "I didn't take it from anyone," he says quickly, his voice rising. "I swear, I just found it on the ground." But the woman doesn't seem to hear him. She's already pulling out her phone, taking pictures and typing furiously. The officer's radio crackles, interrupting the growing tension. "Officer Daniels, we've got a report of something similar a few blocks away. Might be connected." Daniels stiffens, his eyes darting between the man and the object in his hand. "You're not going anywhere yet," he says firmly, as the man's heart pounds harder. What had started as a simple discovery was now spiraling into something much bigger and far more complicated. The officer glances at the man, then back at the woman. "All right, everyone stay calm. Let's figure out what we're dealing with," he says, his tone sharp. He places the object carefully in an evidence bag and gestures for the man to sit on the curb. "I'll need to check something," Daniels adds, stepping away to speak on his radio. The man, now feeling completely cornered, turns to the woman. "What do you mean, valuable? What is this thing?" She kneels beside him, lowering her voice. "If it's what I think, it's part of an old collectible set, worth thousands. People have been looking for pieces like this for years." The man stares at her, stunned. "I had no idea," he mutters. "I just thought it looked cool." Before she can respond, Daniels returns with a serious expression. "Well, we've got good news and bad news," he begins. "The good news is, you're not in trouble. The bad news, this object is linked to a stolen collection reported decades ago." The crowd gasps as the woman steps back in shock. "Wait a minute," she says, her eyes narrowing. "That can't be. My grandfather, he had something just like this, and I remember him saying it was from a friend who passed it down." The officer pauses, then asks, "Your grandfather's name?" When she tells him, his face softens. "This collection was never stolen. It was misplaced after his passing, logged as lost by mistake. You might have just helped solve a decades-old mystery." As the man and the woman exchange stunned glances, the officer looks at the object one last time. "Funny how something so small can carry such a big story," he says, handing it to her. The man exhales deeply, his simple find turning into a tale he'll never forget. The officer watches as the woman carefully holds the object, a mix of emotion and wonder on her face. "I can't believe this piece made its way back to me after all these years," she says softly. The man, still processing everything, manages a small smile. "I guess picking it up wasn't such a bad idea after all," he says, breaking the tension with a bit of humor. The crowd starts to disperse, some murmuring about how strange and unexpected the whole event was. The officer pats the man on the shoulder. "You've got quite the story now," he says with a rare smile. "And hey, next time you find something interesting, maybe think twice before keeping it to yourself." As the man walks away, he feels a strange sense of fulfillment. A small forgotten object had turned into a moment of connection, history, and closure, and he'd been part of it.